We all have those moments in life when we're faced with a choice: comply with something that feels wrong or take a stand. My moment came on a warm spring morning when I opened my mailbox and found a letter that made my blood boil. Dear homeowner, the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association has amended community bylaws to prohibit outdoor cooking appliances, including but not limited to barbecue grills, smokers, and fire pits, effective immediately. I stood there, letter in hand, staring at my beloved grill where I'd cooked countless Sunday dinners, hosted neighborhood gatherings, and created memories with my family for over a decade. The smell of smoked brisket and the sound of friends laughing around that grill was the soundtrack of my summers. Let me back up a bit. I'm Alex, and I've lived in Oak Ridge Estates for 15 years. When I first moved in, the HOA was reasonable. They kept the neighborhood looking nice and organized the occasional block party. I even served on the board for a couple years. But over time, a new group took over, and the rules started piling up. First, it was restrictions on holiday decorations. Then came the approved plant list. Next, they banned basketball hoops in driveways. But banning BBQs? That crossed a line. What the HOA board didn't realize, or perhaps conveniently forgot, was that my property was unique. My 2-acre lot sits partially outside HOA jurisdiction, a quirk from when the development was first built. Half my land, including the back portion where I held my cookouts, wasn't subject to their rules at all. When I pointed this out at the next board meeting, I was met with smirks and dismissal. Rules are rules, the HOA president said, not even bothering to address my legitimate concerns. We expect compliance from all residents. That's when something inside me snapped. Not in an angry way, but in that moment of clarity when you realize exactly what needs to be done. If they wanted to ban BBQs, fine. I would host the biggest, most spectacular cookout this county had ever seen, right on the part of my property they couldn't touch. And I wouldn't just invite a few friends. I would invite everyone. This is the story of how I stood up for my rights, brought a community together, and learned valuable lessons about what it means to fight for what you believe in, all over the right to fire up a grill on your own property. To understand why this barbecue ban hit so hard, you need to know a bit more about my neighborhood and my property. Oak Ridge Estates was built in phases over several decades. The original development started in the 80s, but my section was added in the early 2000s. Because of this patchwork development, property lines and HOA jurisdictions got a little messy. My house sits on the edge of the neighborhood, where my 2-acre lot backs up against undeveloped farmland. When I purchased it, the real estate agent made it clear, and my deed confirmed, that while the house and front yard fell under HOA authority, the back acre was technically outside their jurisdiction. At the time, it seemed like a minor detail. I had no plans to test any boundaries. In those early years, our neighborhood was known throughout the county for its community spirit. The previous HOA board organized seasonal festivals, encouraged block parties, and generally fostered a sense of togetherness. The annual 4th of July BBQ was legendary. People from neighboring communities would find friends to bring them as guests just to experience it. I quickly became known as the grill master of Oak Ridge Estates. My setup wasn't anything fancy at first, just a Weber kettle grill and a cooler of cold drinks. But over the years, I invested in a professional-grade smoker, built an outdoor kitchen, and created a gathering space that could host up to 50 people comfortably. My Sunday cookouts became a neighborhood tradition. Kids who are now in college grew up playing in my yard while their parents enjoyed slow-smoked ribs and cold beers. The shift in the HOA's attitude began about 3 years ago. Most of the old board members moved away or stepped down, replaced by newcomers with different priorities. Patricia Miller, a retired corporate attorney, became the new board president, bringing with her a vision of Oak Ridge Estates as an exclusive, upscale community. The new board members were primarily concerned with property values and aesthetics, often at the expense of community spirit. First came the superficial changes: stricter rules about lawn maintenance, a limited color palette for exterior paint, regulations about trash can visibility. Most people grumbled but complied. Then they started targeting what they called quality of life issues. Noise restrictions tightened. Children's play equipment was regulated. Basketball hoops were deemed unsightly and banned. Throughout all this, my BBQs continued. I was careful about noise levels and made sure guests parked appropriately. But I noticed board members driving by slowly during gatherings, taking notes. Patricia had made thinly veiled comments at community meetings about excessive smoke and noise pollution from certain properties. Then Mrs. Abernathy moved in next door. A close friend of Patricia's from her previous neighborhood, she immediately began complaining about smoke from my grill. Despite the fact that I always checked wind direction and used well-seasoned woods that produced minimal smoke, the complaints increased. I later learned she had never actually experienced any smoke problems. She was allergic to outdoor cooking about as much as she was allergic to fun. The tension built for months until that fateful morning when I received the notice. The HOA had amended the bylaws, effectively banning all outdoor cooking equipment. They cited environmental concerns, fire safety, and neighbor complaints as justification. The letter ended with a warning that non-compliance would result in fines of $100 per day. I wasn't just angry about losing my right to grill. I was heartbroken about losing a tradition that had brought our community together for years. The official ban notice wasn't just a casual recommendation. It was a comprehensive attack on outdoor cooking of any kind. The 4-page document outlined prohibited equipment in excessive detail: charcoal grills, gas grills, pellet smokers, wood-fired ovens, fire pits, portable burners, and even electric grills on balconies. They'd thought of everything. According to the notice, residents had 14 days to remove all outdoor cooking equipment from view. After that, inspections would begin and fines would be assessed. The HOA had even arranged a special bulk disposal event where we could discard our grills and smokers, adding insult to injury. Their reasoning was paper thin. The primary justification was numerous complaints about smoke and odors affecting neighbors' enjoyment of their property. They cited vague studies showing that homes with visible outdoor cooking equipment sold for 5 to 7% less than comparable properties. There was even a paragraph about increased fire risk, despite the fact that our county had never had a single BBQ-related house fire. Within hours of the notices being delivered, my phone started buzzing with texts and calls from neighbors. James from down the street was livid. "They can't do this," he kept saying. "This is America, for God's sake." Maria, who hosted monthly Filipino barbecues for her extended family, was in tears. Even residents who rarely grilled were disturbed by the overreach. I decided to call an informal neighborhood meeting at the community park that evening. Over 50 people showed up, an unprecedented turnout for a non-holiday event. The mood was a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. "They can regulate paint colors, fine, but telling us we can't cook in our own backyards? That's going too far," said Bill, a retired firefighter who had actually trained people on outdoor cooking safety. People shared stories about what their backyard cookouts meant to them. Traditions passed down through generations. Special recipes that could only be made on a grill. The sense of community that came from sharing food cooked outdoors. I listened to everyone, but my mind was already working on a different track. That morning, after receiving the notice, I dug out my property documents and confirmed what I remembered. The back portion of my land was indeed outside HOA jurisdiction. I'd also made a quick call to my cousin Mark, a real estate attorney, who confirmed that the HOA had no authority over that section of my property. At the park meeting, I didn't share my plan yet. I wanted to be certain I was on solid legal ground before making any bold proclamations. But as I drove home that evening, watching the sun set over my backyard, the site of so many happy gatherings, I knew I wouldn't be disposing of my grills anytime soon. The next day, I received an email from the HOA board requesting my presence at an emergency meeting to discuss concerns about the new regulations. Apparently, they'd heard about our gathering at the park and wanted to control the narrative. I agreed to attend, but spent the evening researching property rights and HOA limitations. The meeting was set for Friday evening in the community clubhouse. I arrived early, property documents and legal notes in hand, ready for battle. The emergency HOA meeting was exactly what I expected, a thinly veiled attempt to quell resistance to the new regulations. Patricia Miller stood at the front of the room in a tailored suit, flanked by the other board members, including Mrs. Abernathy, who avoided eye contact with me. "We understand change can be difficult," Patricia began, her voice professionally pleasant but without warmth. "But these new regulations are in the best interest of maintaining our community standards and property values." When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand first. Rather than arguing about the merit of the ban, I calmly presented my property documents and explained that a portion of my land fell outside HOA jurisdiction. "While I respect the HOA's authority to establish rules for properties within its purview," I said, "I want to clarify that the back acre of my property is exempt from these regulations according to the original development plans and my deed." Patricia's smile tightened. "Mr. Richardson, all properties within Oak Ridge Estates are subject to HOA bylaws. There are no exceptions." I slid my documents across the table. "I invite the board to review these." My cousin, who happens to be a real estate attorney, has confirmed that the HOA has no jurisdiction over this portion of my land. The room grew tense as Patricia glanced at the papers without touching them. "We'll have our attorney review these claims," she said dismissively. "In the meantime, we expect compliance from all residents." I left the meeting with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I called Mark again and asked him to draft a formal letter asserting my property rights. Then I started planning the cookout. This wouldn't be just any barbecue. This would be a statement, a celebration of property rights, community spirit, and the simple joy of cooking outdoors. I wanted it to be so big, so undeniably successful, that it would force the HOA to reconsider its stance. First, I mapped out the non-HOA portion of my property, which thankfully included the flat, open area where I'd held gatherings before. I measured and marked the boundaries, making sure every inch of the event would be on land where the HOA had no authority. Next came the logistics. How many people could I reasonably accommodate? With proper planning, my acre could safely host hundreds. I sketched layouts for parking, cooking stations, seating areas, and sanitation facilities. I researched county regulations for large gatherings and discovered I'd need permits if attendance exceeded 500 people. Ambitious, but not impossible. The food planning was a major undertaking. I wanted to showcase different BBQ traditions from around the world, not just American styles. I reached out to friends who specialized in various cuisines: Korean BBQ, Argentina asado, Jamaican jerk, Texas brisket, North Carolina pulled pork. Each would manage a cooking station, bringing their own equipment and expertise. For funding, I created a simple structure. The event would be free to attend, but I'd ask for donations to cover costs. Any excess would go to the local food bank. Several neighbors offered financial contributions up front to help with initial expenses. I assembled a core team of trusted neighbors. Maria handled food safety coordination. James, with his background in event planning, managed logistics. Bill, the retired firefighter, took charge of safety protocols. My teenage nephew created social media accounts for the event, which we named Freedom to Grill, a celebration of community. As word spread, more volunteers stepped forward. Local musicians offered to perform. A neighbor who owned a portable toilet rental company promised facilities at cost. Another with a catering business offered to coordinate serving supplies. We faced challenges, of course. The biggest was parking. We couldn't have hundreds of cars on neighborhood streets without causing chaos. The solution came unexpectedly when a farmer whose land bordered my property heard about our cause and offered his fallow field for overflow parking. Throughout this planning phase, the HOA remained ominously silent. No response to Mark's legal letter. No further communication about my property status. But board members were often seen driving slowly past my house, observing the increasing activity. 3 weeks into planning, I received another certified letter. This one stated that the HOA's attorney had reviewed my claims and determined that while there might be some ambiguity regarding jurisdiction, they strongly advised against any action that would undermine community harmony. It wasn't an admission of defeat, but it wasn't a threat either. They were hedging their bets. By this point, we had over 500 people confirmed through word of mouth alone. The event was still 2 weeks away, and momentum was building. What had started as a defense of property rights had evolved into something more significant, a reclaiming of community spirit that had been slowly eroded by years of increasing restrictions. The night before we launched our social media campaign, I sat on my back porch, looking out over the land that would soon host hundreds of people. I felt a mix of emotions: determination, anxiety, excitement, and a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about barbecue anymore. It was about standing up for something that mattered. With our plans solidifying, it was time to take our message public. We launched our social media campaign with a simple video: me standing at the boundary of my property, explaining what had happened, and inviting people to join us in celebrating the right to grill. Bring your family, your appetite, and your support for property rights and community spirit, I said to the camera. Let's show that some traditions are worth fighting for. The response exceeded our wildest expectations. Within 24 hours, the video had over 10,000 views. By the end of the week, it had reached 50,000. People from neighboring counties expressed interest in attending. Comments poured in from across the country, sharing similar stories of HOA overreach. "This isn't just about BBQ," wrote one commenter. "It's about the slow erosion of what we can do on our own property." The local newspaper picked up the story next. A reporter called, wanting to know more about the BBQ rebellion, as they called it. The resulting article was surprisingly balanced, presenting both the HOA's position and our response. It included quotes from legal experts about HOA jurisdiction limitations and property rights. The day after the article appeared, a local TV station sent a crew to interview me. Standing next to my smoker, I explained that this wasn't about defiance for its own sake. It was about reasonable limits to HOA authority and preserving traditions that bring communities together. "We're not against rules that protect property values," I explained. "We're against rules that destroy the very community spirit that makes this neighborhood special in the first place." As media attention grew, so did interest in the event. Our original goal of 500 attendees now seemed conservative. The social media RSVP count approached 800, with more people messaging daily. We upgraded our plans, arranging for additional portable toilets, expanding the parking area, and recruiting more volunteers. The HOA's response to the growing publicity was predictably bureaucratic. A clarification notice appeared in all residents' mailboxes, stating that the cooking equipment ban was implemented after careful consideration and in line with evolving community standards. They emphasized that non-compliance would still result in fines. More concerning were the rumors that the HOA was pressuring county officials to find some regulatory reason to shut down our event. Bill heard from his former colleagues that the fire marshal's office had received multiple anonymous requests to inspect my property for potential safety violations. We stayed one step ahead. I invited the fire marshal to visit my property and review our safety plans. Impressed by our thoroughness, he provided valuable suggestions rather than obstacles. We secured all necessary permits well in advance and made sure every aspect of the event complied with county regulations. Support continued to grow in unexpected ways. Local businesses began reaching out, offering to donate supplies or services. A regional barbecue sauce company sent cases of their products. A brewing company promised kegs of beer with proceeds going to the food bank. A local band that had recently played at a major music festival volunteered to perform. Even more heartening were the messages from people facing similar situations in other communities. An HOA in a neighboring county had banned vegetable gardens. Another prohibited children's play sets. Our stand was resonating with people who felt similarly constrained by excessive regulations. Not everyone supported us, of course. Some residents worried about traffic, noise, or potential property damage from such a large gathering. We addressed these concerns directly, detailing our plans for traffic management, noise control, and cleanup. Most were reassured, though a few remained skeptical. A week before the event, I received a call from Patricia Miller. Her tone was noticeably different from our previous interactions. Less commanding, more conciliatory. "Mr. Richardson," she said, "the board is concerned about the scale of your planned gathering. We're willing to discuss a compromise regarding the BBQ regulations if you'll consider scaling back this event." It was the first crack in their facade, but it came too late. I appreciate the offer, I replied, but this event has grown beyond just our neighborhood dispute. People are coming to celebrate community and property rights. I can't cancel on them now. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I hope you understand the potential consequences of your actions, she said, her voice regaining some of its edge. I did understand the consequences, both the risks and the potential rewards. What had started as a defense of my right to grill had evolved into something much larger. This was now about reclaiming the sense of community that had made Oak Ridge Estates special in the first place. As the event drew closer, the momentum became unstoppable. Local restaurants asked if they could set up booths. Neighboring HOA residents planned to attend in solidarity. A property rights attorney offered free consultations during the event. The day before the cookout, our final count of confirmed attendees reached 1,000 people. What had once seemed an impossible number now felt inevitable. My backyard would become ground zero for a celebration of property rights, community spirit, and the simple pleasure of cooking outdoors with friends and neighbors. That night, I fired up my smoker to prepare briskets and pork shoulders that would cook slowly through the night. The smell of hickory smoke drifted through the air, a fragrant act of defiance and the herald of something remarkable to come. Dawn broke with perfect weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures forecast to reach a comfortable 75 degrees. I'd been up most of the night tending to the smokers, catching only brief moments of sleep between checking temperatures and adding wood. The meat had developed a beautiful bark, and the aroma was intoxicating. Our volunteer team arrived at 6 a.m., ready to transform my backyard into an event space capable of hosting 1,000 people. The core team had T-shirts made for the occasion. Navy blue with "Freedom to Grill" emblazoned across the front and "Property Rights Matter" on the back. James arrived with a trailer full of tables and chairs borrowed from his church. Maria and her family began setting up the welcome area, complete with maps showing my property boundaries clearly marked. Bill and his team of retired firefighters established first aid stations and reviewed emergency protocols. The cooking zone took shape as grill masters arrived with their equipment. We had designated areas for different BBQ styles: a Texas zone with offset smokers, a Korean section with tabletop grills, a Caribbean corner with jerk drums, and an Argentine area with impressive asado setups. Each station had experts ready to cook and explain their techniques to curious attendees. By 8 a.m., the farmer's field had been transformed into a parking lot, with clear paths marked and parking attendants in position. Shuttle vans would transport people from the overflow lot to my property. The porta potties were delivered and placed discreetly behind decorative screens. Hand washing stations were set up throughout the area. The stage for the bands was erected at the far end of the property, positioned to direct sound away from the closest neighbors. Sound engineers ran tests, keeping volumes within county regulations. Local musicians began arriving to set up their equipment, adding an air of excitement to the preparations. Food safety was a top priority. Maria had arranged for commercial refrigeration units to be delivered, ensuring that all perishable items remained at safe temperatures. Serving tables were equipped with heat lamps or ice baths as needed. Hand washing stations were positioned near every food area, and volunteers were briefed on safe food handling procedures. Around 9 a.m., I noticed a county vehicle driving slowly past my property. The driver took photos before continuing down the road. 30 minutes later, a man in business casual attire approached our welcome table, identified himself as a county zoning inspector, and asked to speak with me. "We've received complaints about a potential zoning violation," he explained, consulting his clipboard. "Commercial events aren't permitted in residential zones without specific variances." Fortunately, we were prepared for this. I invited him to my garage, where I'd set up a small office, and showed him our permits, the charitable nature of the event, and most importantly, the documentation proving that this portion of my property wasn't subject to residential-only zoning restrictions due to its original agricultural designation that had never been formally changed. He reviewed everything carefully, made a few phone calls, and eventually nodded. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, though he didn't sound entirely pleased about it. Just keep the noise within county limits and make sure emergency vehicles have clear access. As he left, I caught sight of Patricia Miller watching from her car parked down the street. Our eyes met briefly before she drove away. I could only imagine the phone calls she'd be making. By 10 a.m., an hour before the official start time, a line had already formed at the entrance. Early arrivals waited patiently, the excitement palpable. The aroma of various woods burning, hickory, apple, mesquite, oak, filled the air, mingling with the scent of meat slowly cooking to perfection. Food donations continued to arrive. Neighbors brought side dishes, coleslaw, potato salad, cornbread, and dozens of homemade desserts. Local restaurants delivered trays of complimentary items: rice, beans, vegetables, and breads from around the world. The beverage station grew to include everything from homemade lemonade to craft beer donated by local breweries. At 10:30 a.m., I gathered all the volunteers for a final briefing. Nearly 100 people stood in a circle, representing diverse ages, backgrounds, and cooking traditions, united by a common cause. Today isn't just about barbecue, I told them. It's about community. It's about reasonable limits to rules and regulations. It's about standing up for traditions that matter. Whatever happens today, let's make it a positive experience for everyone who attends. As 11 a.m. approached, I took a moment to stand alone at the edge of my property, looking out over what we had created. Tents and canopies dotted the landscape. Smoke rose from 24 cooking stations. Flags and banners fluttered in the breeze. Musicians tuned their instruments on the stage. Volunteers in blue shirts moved purposefully through the space, making final adjustments. This had grown far beyond my initial vision. What started as a defiant response to an unreasonable rule had become a celebration of community, property rights, and shared traditions. Whatever happened next, I knew this day would leave a lasting impact on our neighborhood and perhaps beyond. At precisely 11 a.m., I walked to the entrance and cut the ribbon we'd stretched across the path. The Freedom to Grill celebration was officially open. As the ribbon fell, cheers erupted from the waiting crowd. People streamed onto my property, many wearing t-shirts with slogans supporting property rights or celebrating BBQ culture. Families with children, elderly couples, young professionals, people from all walks of life, united by a common appreciation for food, freedom, and community. The atmosphere was electric, yet orderly. Our volunteers guided visitors, explaining the layout and highlighting different attractions. Near the entrance, we'd created a Know Your Rights booth, where 2 property attorneys provided free consultations. Beside it, a local historian had set up a display about the evolution of our county's communities and how neighborhood regulations had changed over time. But the heart of the event was, of course, the food. 20 different cooking stations created a global tour of BBQ traditions. At the Texas station, pitmasters sliced brisket that had been smoking for 16 hours, the meat pulling apart with just the right amount of resistance before melting in your mouth. The Korean barbecue area had lines forming as people watched thin slices of marinated beef sizzling on tabletop grills. In the Caribbean corner, jerk chicken released aromatic plumes of allspice-scented smoke. I moved through the crowd, greeting people, thanking volunteers, and occasionally checking in with our logistics team. The turnout exceeded even our revised expectations. By noon, our counters at the entrance had tallied over 600 visitors, with more arriving every minute. The parking team reported that the main lot was 3/4 full, and we'd already started using the overflow area. Local media arrived in force. 2 television stations set up cameras near the main cooking area, conducting interviews with attendees and grill masters. A reporter from the regional newspaper followed me around for 30 minutes, asking about the origins of the dispute and the overwhelming community response. "This isn't just my fight," I explained. "Everyone here believes in reasonable limits to rules and regulations. We're not against all rules. We're against rules that go too far and destroy the very community they're supposed to protect." Around 1 p.m., the first band took the stage, a local blues group whose lead singer lived in an adjoining neighborhood with similar HOA restrictions. Between songs, he shared his own stories of regulatory overreach, drawing knowing laughs and applause. The children's area buzzed with activity. Face painters created designs featuring flames and grills. A local science teacher had set up a display explaining the chemistry of cooking with fire. Teenagers competed in a beanbag toss tournament with grilling-themed targets. Throughout the afternoon, I kept expecting some form of opposition: county officials with cease and desist orders, HOA representatives documenting violations, or at least angry neighbors complaining about the noise. But our careful planning paid off. The sound levels stayed within regulations. Traffic flowed smoothly thanks to our volunteer parking attendants. The event remained peaceful and orderly despite the massive turnout. By mid-afternoon, our attendance counter passed 900. The energy remained high as the second band took the stage, playing upbeat country rock that had people dancing between the food stalls. The smoking grills continued to turn out amazing food, with many stations offering small samples so people could taste multiple styles. At 3 p.m., something unexpected happened. Patricia Miller herself appeared at the entrance with 3 other HOA board members. Our welcome volunteers, unsure how to respond, radioed me immediately. I walked over to greet them personally, determined to remain civil regardless of their intent. "Welcome to the Freedom to Grill celebration," I said, extending my hand. "I'm glad you could make it." Patricia ignored my hand. "We're here to observe and document violations," she said stiffly. "This gathering clearly violates multiple HOA regulations." "You're welcome to observe," I replied calmly. "But as you know, this portion of my property isn't subject to HOA jurisdiction. We have all necessary county permits, as the inspector confirmed this morning." I offered them visitor wristbands, which they reluctantly accepted. "Feel free to enjoy the food and music while you're here," I added. "The Korean short ribs are especially good." They moved through the event with visible discomfort, taking photos and making notes. But something interesting happened as they encountered neighbors and other attendees. People approached them, not with anger, but with friendly invitations to talk, to share food, to listen to music together. I watched from a distance as Mrs. Abernathy reluctantly accepted a plate of brisket from James, and then saw her face transform with unexpected pleasure as she took her first bite. By 4 p.m., our official count reached 1,150 people. We had exceeded our target. The event had taken on a festival atmosphere, with people lingering at picnic tables, children playing on the open grass areas, and musicians jamming together between scheduled performances. Throughout the day, attendees had been dropping donations into large containers at the exit. When we counted later, we found over $15,000, far more than needed to cover our costs, with plenty to donate to the food bank. The most powerful moment came at 5 p.m., when I took the stage briefly to thank everyone for coming. Looking out over the crowd, hundreds of people enjoying food, music, and each other's company, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. "Today has been about more than BBQ," I said into the microphone. "It's been about community, about neighbors supporting neighbors, about standing up for reasonable freedom. Whatever happens next with our HOA dispute, remember this feeling. This is what community should be." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. As I stepped down from the stage, people reached out to shake my hand or offer words of thanks. An elderly woman I'd never met hugged me and whispered, "You've done something important here, young man." As the sun began to set, the crowd gradually thinned. Families with young children departed first, followed by elderly attendees. The music shifted to softer acoustic sets. The smoking grills were extinguished one by one, though the scent of wood smoke lingered in the air. By 8 p.m., only about 100 people remained, mostly volunteers and close neighbors helping with the initial cleanup. We gathered near the main tent, sharing leftover food and stories from the day. The exhaustion was setting in, but so was the satisfaction of having created something truly memorable. What had started as an act of defiance had transformed into a celebration of community spirit. Whatever came next, we had made our point in the most positive way possible. The day after the cookout, I woke to find my property remarkably clean. A team of volunteers had stayed late into the night, ensuring that every piece of trash was collected, every table and chair returned, every sign and banner taken down. Other than some flattened grass, there was little evidence that over 1,000 people had gathered there just hours before. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, thank you notes, photos from the event, and links to media coverage. The local newspaper had run a front-page story with the headline, "BBQ Rebellion Draws Thousands in HOA Dispute." The article was surprisingly thoughtful, using our event as a launching point for a discussion about the appropriate limits of homeowners associations. Local TV stations aired segments showing the peaceful, family-friendly atmosphere and interviewing attendees about why they had come. A regional news site published an opinion piece titled, "When Rules Go Too Far, Lessons from the Great BBQ Standoff." Social media activity continued at a feverish pace. Our event page filled with photos and stories from attendees. Many shared how the gathering had inspired them to get more involved in their own HOA boards or local governance. Others related similar experiences with excessive regulations and asked for advice on addressing them. 3 days after the event, I received an official letter from the HOA board requesting a discussion regarding recent events and potential policy adjustments. The tone was markedly different from previous communications, less commanding, more collaborative. I agreed to meet, but suggested that we include a few other homeowners to ensure diverse perspectives. To my surprise, they accepted this condition. We arranged to meet the following week at the community clubhouse. When I arrived for the meeting, I found not just the board members, but nearly 30 residents packed into the room. Patricia looked uncomfortable with the unexpected turnout, but proceeded with the agenda. "Recent events have highlighted the need to revisit certain community regulations," she began, choosing her words carefully. "The board recognizes that some rules may have been implemented without sufficient input from residents." What followed was the most productive HOA meeting in years. Residents shared their concerns about various regulations, not just the BBQ ban, but other restrictions that had diminished community spirit. Board members actually listened. Patricia, while never explicitly admitting error, acknowledged that a balance must be struck between property values and quality of life. By the end of the meeting, the board had agreed to form a resident committee to review all regulations enacted in the past 3 years. They also announced an immediate suspension of the outdoor cooking ban pending that review. Even more surprising was the announcement of a community-wide cookout to be held in the neighborhood park the following month, organized jointly by the HOA and resident volunteers. Patricia asked if I would be willing to serve as grill master. An olive branch I gladly accepted. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of our event continued to spread. 2 neighboring HOAs announced reviews of their own regulations. A county commissioner contacted me about serving on a task force examining the relationship between HOAs and local government. A state representative reached out to discuss potential legislation establishing clearer limits on HOA authority. The story even gained national attention when a popular morning show featured a segment on HOA disputes, using our cookout as a positive example of community response. They interviewed me via video call, along with an HOA expert who explained that many associations overstep their authority because residents don't understand their rights. Not all outcomes were positive, of course. A small faction of residents remained angry about the event, citing traffic inconvenience and what they called blatant disrespect for community standards. Mrs. Abernathy continued to give me cold looks when we passed on the street, though I noticed she had recently installed a small electric grill on her patio, a small victory of sorts. The most meaningful changes happened within our community itself. Neighbors who had barely spoken before found connections through their shared experience at the cookout. People began organizing smaller gatherings, book clubs, game nights, children's playdates. The isolation that had been growing for years began to reverse. 3 months after the event, the Resident Review Committee presented its recommendations to the HOA board. They proposed significant revisions to the bylaws, focusing on preserving community character while maintaining reasonable standards. The outdoor cooking ban was permanently rescinded, replaced with sensible guidelines about smoke management and fire safety.